Okay, we will be starting very shortly at 7:03. Well, welcome to NALE Tri-State's final program of the year, everyone. This is the Art of Salary Negotiation. My name is Taina Lopez Cartagena. I am the Secretary and Programming Committee Chair. So we are the National Association of Latino Healthcare Executives, our Tri-State chapter, and our primary mission is to be the organization and chapter of choice to our Latinx and non-Latinx healthcare leaders in the tri-state region. That's New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut. And we want everyone to feel welcomed and encouraged to get involved in making a difference in healthcare fields while always feeling valued and represented. Our organization aims to connect and support our Latinx students, early careerists, healthcare professionals, and executives across the tri-state area. We promote a culture of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging by increasing Latinx representation in healthcare leadership. And we do this by way of programming, volunteering, mentoring, and collaborating with like-minded organizations. And now to segue, we can all relate that one's salary is a fundamental consideration of their professional life. Negotiating your starting pay and asking for raises are critical factors in choosing what professional pathway you take on and how you feel really valued within your profession. Salary negotiation is a critical step in the hiring process. And by taking the time to talk through why you feel you need more compensation, you can help employers better understand your value as well as your profession's value. And as with any new skill, the more you negotiate, the more you will improve and the easier it will become. As salary pertains to Latinos, the American Association of University Women note Latinas in the US are paid 46% less than white men and 26% less than white women. The wage gap for Latinos is as high as 288 billion per year. According to the economic state of Latinos in America, the American dream deferred. As per the National Equity Atlas, in the United States, Latino workers earn the lowest median wages of any major racial group. And in current affairs, New York City's wage transparency law seems to be a step in the right direction. It became effective November 1st of 2022. And this legislation requires disclosure of salary ranges in advertisements rather than offer letters or upon requests from applicants or employees. Under the law, employers must include in any advertisement for a job, promotion, or transfer opportunity the minimum and maximum annual salary or hourly range of compensation that the employer in good faith believes to be accurate at the time of the posting. Now, we want to thank you all for attending, and we want to thank our esteemed panelists and introduce them. Please welcome Julian Lopez. Julian is a principal consultant in ERM's corporate sustainability and climate change practice. He helps companies develop and implement sustainability strategies that are relevant, to their businesses with a focus on GHG inventorying and decarbonization. Julian has extensive experience across both the public and private sectors, having worked most recently for the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, followed by KPMG and now ERM. In his various capacities, he managed multi-million-dollar budgets, oversaw large capital projects, and used data and analytics to assess, then address organizational challenges with people, processes, and technologies. Julian graduated with a BA from Tufts University, his MPP from Harvard, and MBA from NYU. Julian views negotiations as a critical skill that every individual should hone, having engaged in it successfully and unsuccessfully throughout his educational and professional journeys. Welcome, Julian. Marisa Duque is a group account supervisor at Biolumina, a full-service integrated agency delivering customized data-driven solutions for oncology brands. She has spent 11 years providing high-quality account services across multiple industries, 5 of those in advertising. Through her partnership with clients and internal cross-functional teams, she has developed successful marketing initiatives that have increased brand awareness and product sales. Prior to transitioning into healthcare advertising, she was working on new business development for FCB Global, a global advertising agency that services the US and international markets. Before finding her home in advertising, she was working in consumer sales marketing at smaller scale companies. She graduated from Hofstra with her BA and has an expertise in business development and marketing. Marisa is excited to discuss how one navigates salary negotiations. And now I'm going to turn it over to Jose Garcia, the president-elect, and who will be the president leading NALE starting January 2023. Jose will continue moderating the program. Please welcome Jose.
All right, awesome. Thank you, Dana, for that wonderful introduction. Welcome everyone. We're so happy you were able to make it. Gabriel, who's our treasurer, was originally supposed to moderate. He had something come up, so he's not with us today. So I'm, stepping in for him. So like I said, thank you everyone, and really thank you for submitting all of your questions. We were reviewing them with our panelists as well ahead of the event, and they are very insightful. So there's a lot to cover, so why don't we, dive right in? And if you have any additional questions, please use the Q&A and the chat features. We will make sure to moderate those throughout the event. So we'll get to ask some of the questions that you asked us when you registered, and then we'll allot time at the end for Q&A as well. So we received, some questions about, transparency laws. And I know, this has been new legislation that has been introduced as well. So why don't we, start there? And the question is, how can job candidates use new pay transparency laws to better navigate salary conversations? What about, companies that intentionally post very wide salary ranges as a way to, sidestep the law? And we can start with Marisa, and then we'll go over to Julian.
Oh, awesome. Thank you. Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for that amazing introduction, Taina. So I think this, in terms of the background and how you kind of navigate, I know the new legislation was passed and a lot of companies are still looking to initiate it. Personally, the company that I'm currently with, which is Biolumina, they're under Omnicom Group. They're still kind of transitioning into that. So I think it's important to realize this has been passed. You may or may not come across companies that have started to initiate it. It might take some time for that to kind of roll or become into effect. But I do want to just flag, or for me, during my experience in just navigating my salary, I think it's really important when you're researching open roles, understanding the roles or responsibilities for the level that you want to enter into. And sometimes companies do offer a wide range. I think the standard approach is you should always assume the lower range is going to be an entry level of that role. And maybe the higher range would be like the higher level, the more experienced level in that role, because there's always a bracket that the company has to adhere to. Their financial procurement or financial department has to adhere to a salary range bracket for every single role. And they usually determine it by entry level, mid-level to senior level. So let's say for a group account supervisor, which is my role, some companies look at that as an account director. Sometimes it's considered a group account supervisor. So if I were considering how there was a wide range, maybe between 20K, I mean, sometimes there are large gaps, I won't lie. I have to consider what are the roles and responsibilities. What are the ones that I know that I have achieved thus far? Which are the ones that I feel like I don't have that much experience in? And then you want to kind of scale yourself. Do you think your entry, are you coming in from another group account supervisor role, or is this a jump where you at a junior level? If you're at a junior level coming into this new role, that's considered a jump. So technically that would be considered entry level. So I think the best way to navigate that is to understand where you are at your company, where you're jumping into for that new company you're considering, and what are the roles and responsibilities that you know you've already checked off on your list.
Yes, thank you, Marisa. I mean, the point of this legislation is to really be correcting the inequalities and discrimination that people have faced, right? There's race, there's gender,
Yeah.
when we think about hiring and salary. And the good faith term is a little problematic. But what we do have here in New York is something called the Commission on Human Rights, and that is in charge of forcing this new law. So there are a number of organizations that are kind of starting to, have this conversation, starting to put things in writing for their employees. But the thought is that there's likely going to be additional legislation that's needed for this to address these broad ranges that you brought up, right? Because what can happen is there's this salary posted and there's this minimum and this huge max. So there has to be some type of, there has to be something in place, maybe avoiding the double min and max is something to think about. But to what you said, skill sets, experience and training, licensures, certifications, all of that is going to matter to organizations. So knowing what you bring to the table is truly important. But once again, if you feel there's some type of issue and you want to know, you can always report it to the Commission on Human Rights, because they are in charge of enforcing this new legislation.
Awesome. And I should add that you always, of course, don't shorten yourself. Like if you're always reaching to the max. So you're going to learn the information in the role. So don't always give yourself the short end, the stick. Don't say like, this is entry level, so let me stick to this. And we'll probably get to like other ways of approaching it through the other questions. I don't want to give away too much right now, but I just wanted to caveat that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing. Which I think brings us to the next question, that we saw a lot, where you found the right job, you applied for it, you're on the phone with the recruiter and they ask you, on the spot, right? What are your salary expectations? Which can be, a very anxiety inducing question, right? So how can you best go about answering this, when you're through this stage of the job interview process?
Do you want me to take that one, or Julian, do you want to take it?
I'm happy to jump in. Defer to Jose. Is that okay?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Maybe I can get going, and then you can jump in with any additional commentary.
Yeah.
Appreciate that. And I'll say thank you for Jose, Taina, inviting me as well as Marisa onto this panel. Sort of eager to discuss this topic and hopefully provide some sort of background and experiences that are helpful to folks on the line. So I guess when I think about this question, salary is important. I think I always want to sort of caveat that within the broader conversation of compensation. I think someone alluded to this earlier. I think salary is but one important component of ultimately what you will be compensated by or with by your employer. And so I think when considering what your expectations are for salary, you really need to think about it in that lens. I think I take two general philosophies, though, against this particular question. One is you can kind of dodge it a bit. Don't answer it directly, but instead share your thoughts about salary and share the fact that, hey, I have a hard time answering that question only because I don't have a broader understanding of what else is involved with compensation and the things that you might want to consider that are super important, value adds, things like vacation, specifically schedules, what days of the week you're going to be working, if it's sort of not a typical 9 to 5, how many hours per day, what days of the week those might be. You can also think about tuition reimbursement, which might be highly applicable to some of the folks on the phone. There are a number of other important considerations like healthcare, et cetera. So I think taking that broader lens, understanding exactly what you look for in terms of a number, but also where else you can extract value, and think about that sort of thing in place of maybe a salary figure or some component of it is important. That's one approach. Totally fine to do that and circle back on that down the road. I think another approach is to, and you do this, I think, when you have a really sound understanding of what the range is, and not just a broad-based overarching range that might be given by the employer, but not really mean anything to you. 100K range doesn't mean anything to anyone, really. It's just too big. But I think if you've done your homework, if you understand where you might be coming in at based on sort of market comps, other organizations, lots of Glassdoor, Indeed, and other resources you might have poked around through, you can pick a much narrower range, and you should anchor high, like Marissa said, just anchor super high on that, but come with a really concrete set of examples and reasons why you deserve what you think you're worth. And I think you can point to, qualitative or quantitative specific accomplishments, either in the workplace or educationally, that might move the needle for you. So I would, you have a few different approaches that I threw out there. Pick the one that works best in a given situation, but I do think it's somewhat situational to get this right.
Yeah, awesome. I agree with that, Julian, and I want to add, I think there's a few things to consider. I agree where Julian was coming from, and I think because you mentioned, Jose, that like if a recruiter's reaching out to you and ask you what your salary range is, I think there's ways that you can prepare yourself. I think, and it really depends on at what stage of the job hunt are you in? Are you currently in a job already? And I need to make, in order to leave this job, I need to make more than where I'm at now. Or have you recently graduated and you have no idea what the range will be? You're kind of doing research. So there are different stages that will apply to you. And I think it's important to recognize sometimes recruiters, they're like cold callers. They're going to be calling you nonstop. They're going to force a meeting with you. What's really important is if you don't have the information, ask them before the meeting. Please give me some more information and background on this role, because that gives you the opportunity to prepare before the call. You definitely don't want to get on and give them the impression that you're not sure what your range is, because then they're going to feel like they can take advantage of that. You want to be firm in whatever you offer. So definitely try as best as possible to get any information up front. And sometimes recruiters will try to give you like, well, this is a contracted role, I don't want to give you that much information. They have to give you at least some sort of foundational information for you to understand where you would fit within that role. So if they push back, be like, well, I need to understand where my skill sets will fit. And I want to make sure this is a role that I'm interested in pursuing. So definitely make sure you're finding a way to react so that you are prepared. You don't want to be caught off guard. And I think the other aspect of that is allow your time, allow yourself the opportunity to network within people who, like, let's say there's another person within your network that they're a little bit more senior than where you are. Try to see if you can network with that person, because sometimes, you want to follow the trail in which they got to where they did. Even just reaching out to them and say, hey, do you have 5 minutes? I want to just get, some feedback. I want to get some understanding. And most people who are already higher than where you are don't mind sharing their salary, because they're like, it's like an old salary. I don't mind telling this individual when I was at a junior level, this was my salary at the time. So then you can kind of understand this is what I know they've accepted, and this is where I want to be firm. And then just like Julian said, definitely try, you want to go at least 10 to, sometimes 15K higher, sometimes, just so that you can kind of compromise. So I hope that, I know that was a mouthful, but
I think that's great.
That's very helpful. It's very helpful. And, it's definitely learning how to advocate for yourself, right? Like, you should feel empowered to ask those questions, right? When you're interviewing, I think we hear it all the time. They're interviewing you, but you're interviewing that company as well. And they want to know if you're a good fit. But, you should feel empowered to be able to ask those questions. Can you give me more information? And then, I love what you mentioned, Marissa, about, leveraging your network as well. Find someone that's already been in your shoes, right? 5 years ago, and see what their experience are, because they can offer a lot of insight as well.
I saw a question in chat I just wanted to quickly address, and it's a point that Dinah raised. Elaborate on quantitative and qualitative successors when negotiating salaries. I think what I was referencing in my comment around this is sort of demonstrating very clearly numerically. For example, I'm going to apply to a financial analyst role. I have a background in this. Articulating very clearly the size of the budgets I've managed, $200, $300 million, how much money have I saved the organization within a specific time period. I think you want to get really concrete and also make these sorts of things highly applicable to either the role or the organization that you're applying to. I think time and money are the things that matter to a lot of employers. If you can somehow quantify that very cleanly, that's super important. I think if you can address having worked in either large teams, cross-sectoral teams, interdisciplinary teams, I think highlighting that is important. Managing people, so being a people manager is also worth highlighting. And I think these are the types of things that, you know, depending again on the role, employers are keen to understand. So if you can discuss this very concretely with numbers, facts, figures, I think that always bodes well. I think qualitatively, if you can articulate that descriptively, I think that does the job as well.
Yeah, and I would just add to you wrote something to me real quick. I think it's important to jot these things. Like I even have it on my resume. Like I have goals and accomplishments for each role. It doesn't have to be everything, or even you can have it in a notes. Just start to track what you're accomplishing, and remember, anything that you've touched while you were in that role can be counted towards your experience. You don't have to say, I'm not telling you to go the extra mile and pretend that you managed the entire $100 million project, but even if it's like I supported an aspect of an $100 million account, an aspect of it, just you don't want to oversell, but understand that everything that you're touching can add to your experience level, can translate in ways that you probably didn't think were imaginable. And I think that's what's the hardest part is people don't know how to sell themselves and to translate their skill set.
Absolutely, sell yourself and don't sell yourself short, but then, be cautious and not overselling as well. So I think, in alignment with that, how do you, when answering what are your salary expectations, now that you, share that, you receive the offer from the company, what are some, general tips that you can give on counter offering? When is, pushing too much, right? And should someone be concerned, they're going to put themselves in jeopardy, if they ask for too much, how can someone that's going through that process, help navigate that?
I can jump in here, maybe take a first swipe. First, always do it. That's my strong recommendation. If you don't ask, you won't get. So always do it as a general rule. Now, how many times you do it, I think that's highly debatable. Always do it at least once, I would say, and then I think it becomes a little situational. You can get slapped down pretty quickly, or that could lead to some really interesting conversations again about salary or compensation at large. So always do it. And I think the other thing you want to do is always do it sort of fairly and responsibly. I think if you make sort of wild and outlandish asks, that's not going to bode well for you. Not only will you get a no, I've heard of people actually getting offers rescinded. So, just be as informed, educated, prepared as possible. Marissa hit on a few things that are super clutch. I think contacting your network, really understanding the dynamics either in the organization or in competitors, similar roles, looking at online resources that might be indicative of where you might land based on your experience and educational background. You should be able to pinpoint ultimately a range that's 10 to 15K plus or minus. And I think if you have that in mind and can narrow it further, I think that always bodes really, really well. But as a general matter, definitely counter, but do it responsibly.
Yeah, and just to add, I think when countering, I think my approach, it really depends. Like if I was on the phone or if I got an email, I feel like you always want to lead with a positive, like, oh, I'm so excited. The team is great. I think what you're providing is something phenomenal here. I appreciate the role that's needed, and I think I can fill it because of XYZ. But here are some things that I feel like I want to match what I would be offering and what I think you're missing, and just kind of lead with positive so that they know you're not just countering because you want more money. You're countering because you feel like the role that they need or what they're looking for, you can fill and 10 times more than that. What is your value add? Or even it's something like you feel like I had a friend who once felt like the PTO wasn't enough. So she's like, I really need 5K more because you're not offering me the PTO that I have in my current company. So it really can make sure you're kind of trying to figure out what are the reasons why you want to counter and lead with the positive. So they know that you appreciated the time that you met and you love the team.
Absolutely. Do your research, right? And be an informed customer. So just as a quick follow-up to that, when what do you budge in, right? And I mean, do you consider, the position, what this might mean for you? Is it a stepping stone in your career? Especially we got a lot of questions from, our early careerists, and early on in your career, you have a little less, wiggle room. So, when do you, say like, okay, well, I'm going to take it, I'm going to run with it, because it's going to give me good experience. It's a good stepping stone. How do you navigate that as an early careerist as well?
So you said navigating when you're starting a role for the first, like when you're early on, like a junior. Repeat that, sorry.
Yeah, definitely. We were talking about negotiation, right? So when, is it at a point where you maybe didn't get what you were hoping for, or, the figure, they just don't seem to be negotiating with you, but as an early careerist, that this job, could potentially lead to something better, right? Or it's a, stepping stone in your career. So how do you navigate that, being an early careerist?
Oh, so like, what is your comeback after they told you we can't negotiate this anymore?
Yes, yeah.
I feel like, I mean, it doesn't hurt to ask. So always think like, well, thank you. I appreciate it. I wanted to just make sure I got all the information. And even if you want to be like, I want to take this information and circle back with you. Just like, I almost feel like you're playing like a give and take. Like it's like not really like cat and mouse, but it's like, you want to, like, if you're caught off guard and you're like, okay, they're not taking my salary negotiation, at least let them know you appreciate, you understand where they're coming from. You want to take the opportunity to review the offer and get back to them, just so that they know it's like, I almost feel like you don't want to come off like you're just asking for more money and then you're just standing down right away. Like you stay firm in the reason why you did it. You're requesting to negotiate and a higher rate because of the research that you've done. So allow your time to be able to review what they've given back to you and then circle back with them. I mean, that's how I would approach it, but I know, and that how I have in the past too. And sometimes it's even like, I'm considering a few roles as well who are, like I work in advertising. So I feel like, I know there are some healthcare roles here that are a little bit more strict in terms of like the PTO, contractual, what's available to them. And my approach in advertising and marketing is you always want to be transparent. And sometimes you're working with a recruiter who really wants to work with you. Just understand what kind of relationship you're working with, be personable and let them know like you want to think on the options that have been presented to you.
If you are offered a job, you are the number one candidate for that job. You should feel good, okay? That you're in a position of power, right? And I don't think you abuse that power by any means, but you leverage it, right? You should be able to have a really candid and straightforward conversation around salary. Again, grounded in facts, grounded in reality. And when you have these conversations, entry level or experience, when you have these conversations around salary, you should feel like it's appropriate to ask for the number that you think, after doing your homework, you are worth. Now, whether you get that number, whether you get the yes or no, debatable. What you do with that thereafter, that's really a personal choice and personal decision. But I think at a minimum, you should square that hole. You should definitely go in and ask for that number that you believe you're worth after you've done the homework. And again, I just go back. I was a Boy Scout. Our motto was be prepared. So be prepared when you're having these conversations. You need not react immediately off the cuff to just give a number for the sake of giving a number. I think, Marissa, you were just alluding to that, right? Step back, step away from the conversation and re-engage when you're better prepped and prepared to actually have that convo.
Yeah. And sometimes, especially if it's entry level, I know I keep just going along. Apologies if I'm never ending talking here, but I just feel like when it's entry level, an alternative to not getting the match that you want for the salary is what are the opportunities? What is the career trajectory that can be offered here? Like what can be offered by this company in terms of allowing me to grow? How does that look? Like if Marissa joined tomorrow, and I know I'm talking in third person, like what would that look like a year from now, 2 years, 5 years? You could also ask that. Like if they're not matching you salary wise, at least they can match you in growth potential, experience level.
And some people, don't realize that there are other things that are negotiable, right? Like, PTO, certifications, attending conferences, etc. And so, even though you may not have a ton of wiggle room and, the actual salary, there are other things that are always on the table as well. So, given, I think we followed, kind of a timeline, right? From when the recruiter called, the offer is placed, but now, you're in the position or you're in the company, and, this is something for some of the people that are, a little bit more seasoned, when is it appropriate to ask for a raise? And the question specifically is, outside of the yearly merit increase, when is it appropriate to come to the table and say, hey, this is what I've been doing, and I think I should, get a bump? How do you even navigate having that conversation? And whoever wants to start us off.
I can get us going. My gut tells me that probably this is an annual conversation, but it can be shorter, it can be longer. Most companies have sort of a formal review cycle in place. Most companies slot you with a manager that's meant to be someone that oversees your performance, but also acts as a sponsor, perhaps, for you, insofar as they'll go to bat if there are promotion conversations to be had. I think through that formal process, which is typically annual, the kinks of salary and whatnot will be worked out. And I think if you are not receiving merit-based increases, CPI adjusted increases or inflation adjusted increases, then you have a right to sort of demand a salary increase almost, because you are in fact making less money next year than you did today if that's not baked in. But I think as a general matter, assuming you get some of these sort of increases year over year, I think if you are seeking a broad-based promotion, or not even a promotion, maybe a simple salary increase, I think you have to come not just asking for more money, but being able to point to the work you've done over the course of the year. Marissa said, keep a log. I think that's excellent advice. Basically demonstrate exactly what you've done, demonstrate why it adds value to the company. If you can equate that to monetarily, how they're saving money or time, I think that's always worthwhile. And I think then that positions you really well to have that conversation around potential salary increases. Again, the dynamics kind of change in a scenario base. If you're on small teams, and you're definitively filling lots of gaps that people having left might have created a void for, that is a good reason to have a conversation around salary, because inherently your roles and responsibilities have changed. So things of that nature also could factor in. But I think you should have this in your head at least 6 months to annually. I think any more, it's probably off-putting by managers and organizations at large. But that's my 2 cents, and that's sort of what I've practiced to date.
Yeah, I agree. I would say 6 months to a year. But I do want to ensure everyone here knows that there could be differences in how in the stage in which you're in, or I mean, I know Julian, you mentioned it already, but I know for my company, I mean, we don't call it merit-based, we call it like cost of living increases, which sometimes are only like $2,000, $2,500, $3,000. If you want anything more than that, like a 10K, 15K jump, always assume it means you're going to need a promotion in the title that you're doing. So what I was told many years ago by a manager was, take out, because every company needs to have a roles or responsibilities for all of the roles that they offer. Take out the role that, print out like a list of the roles or responsibilities for the role that you're in, and print out the one for where you want to be, and compare what you've done, what you haven't done, what you want to do. And those are good. That is a good foundational base for how you can help lead your conversations with your manager of why you think you deserve a promotion. Sometimes you don't want to, I mean, sometimes it's not direct. Like, you're not going to go to your manager and say, I think I need a promotion, because you're going to schedule a one-on-one. Like, you're going to say, hey, I'm reaching my 6 month, I'm reaching my 1 year. I want to start thinking about where my career is moving and how I'm growing within the company. Can I grab 15 minutes, 30 minutes with you to go over some of my thoughts? And they will understand. I mean, you don't have to say, I want a promotion. It's almost like you're giving them breadcrumbs. They'll know this means Marissa or Julian might want to have a conversation with me about where they feel and how they can grow. And sometimes they might feel like you're not ready, but at least they know this employee of mine is interested in a promotion. What are some things that I can do to help get them there? Because you have to advocate for yourself. Your manager, I don't know if I've ever worked with anyone that wants to offer me more money. They're going to want to save money on you any chance they get. So if you speak for yourself and you let them know this is where I want to be, and if you feel like there's still a gap in what you can learn, let them know in the next 6 months, I want to be doing X, Y, and Z to get me to the next career path. And I also think another quick aspect of that is, again, I have a folder. Literally, I think it was like an old manager that told me, make a folder called, accomplishments. Anytime you get a kudos in an email, anytime you job well done, you finished a big project, put a copy of that email into that folder so that 6 months you can review that and you don't have to go searching and hunting for all of these accomplishments that you've done throughout the year. So I think that's a great way to do it. That's how I've done it sometimes if I can't think of it.
And you just gave me a really good thought. I think that's the right approach, and I actually do something like that. I have like a high five folder or something to myself. When people give me kudos, I always drop a draft email in there. I think another sort of very similar idea and approach to this is to sort of proactively ask a manager, like, what are the things that I need to accomplish this year in order to be considered for a salary promotion, a promotion or a salary increase, or what have you, whatever it is. And you use that as a guide to say, okay, Q1, what am I going to do against these specific goals to make sure sort of I'm moving the needle, Q2, et cetera. Hold yourself accountable, but also use that agreed upon list with your supervisor to really basically as an ammunition to make a really strong case for why a promotion or salary increase is in order. I think if you have 5 items and you check all the boxes, and you're at the end of your performance year, I think that should position you to have a really strong case for whatever it is you agreed on with your supervisor. So I would also take that approach as well.
Awesome, thank you for sharing. I think if there is a theme, for tonight, is come prepared, right? Be ready to have those, fierce conversations, but come to the table, prepared to back up, what you're asking for as well. Another question, that we got is, is it appropriate to ask for your colleagues or your peers, that are at the same, kind of level for their salary range to see if you're being paid accordingly? And I think, there are many things that go into this, like experience, and how many years you've been, seniority, etc. But, is that appropriate? Can I go to, a peer and ask, hey, how much are you making? Because I want to, be sure that I'm paid accordingly as well.
I feel like it's harder. Well, first of all, it depends what kind of relationship you have with that person. If you've never talked to them ever in your life, don't just message them randomly because they might get offended. They might go to HR. So I think wherever you work, it's always important to network outside of your team. Network with people in the same level as you, network with those a level above you who have just recently gotten promoted. I think it's always easier to go to someone who's above me, who's recently gotten promoted, who's not going to feel uncomfortable about what they used to make. I feel like I said it earlier, it's always harder to go to, because if you go to someone who's the same level as you, it might be, I don't know if people are like this, but some people might take it like competitively, like, are you my competition now? Like, you just never know how someone's going to react. You always want to assume someone's going to know your intentions or coming from a good place, but not everyone is going to have that same mindset. So definitely network in your team, make those connections, make those friendships. You're with these people 8 hours of the day. Please don't, if you expect or want to move in your career, don't be one of those people that's like, bye, I'm leaving try to feel like what connections can you make with people on your team, with other teams. So that's how I've always approached it. And I've never had an issue.
I had a colleague actually start a really interesting conversation with me maybe 2 years ago. And he literally said something like, I don't need you to tell me how much you make, but for transparency's sake, I want to share with you what I'm making. and have a discussion around compensation. I thought that was really, really fascinating. And basically, he point blank told me his number. And what was interesting was that in the role I had, it was possible to make, 50K above that number and some amount below it. So there was a pretty wide range, and effectively we're doing the same job. I'm getting paid more. And hearing his candidness, the fact that we fostered such strong and good relationships, the fact that I felt like he had good judgment if I shared with him my number, what he would do with that. I think that'll enable me to have a really good conversation with him. So I think Marissa hit on all the points. I think ultimately you need that strong relationship with someone for them to be candid with you and you to be candid with them. This definitely isn't a one-sided conversation. I feel highly uncomfortable offering up my number, not being reciprocated. So you want to just get on the same page on that. But it's also important to know that, I once I learned the situation, it felt really unfair. I wanted to be an advocate for him so that we can sort of recalibrate and normalize his figure. And so he had an ally in me, just his approach, his demeanor, the fact that I trusted him, all that really worked to his favor. I don't know if it resulted in anything. We never talked about it that much more again. But at the end of the day, I felt comfortable with that conversation. So I think, if you are contemplating speaking to other people about your number and how that might compare, I think you have to know why. I think you have to have a really good reason to have this conversation. I think you need to have that really, really strong relationship, and you have to basically ensure that, they're in a similar position to you. Either they want to share their number or have a broad-based discussion around pay and what it means, and maybe how to course correct if one of you are sort of falling behind, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to ask a question that's very insightful, and I found very insightful. We have a few minutes left, so if you want to type in your questions in the Q&A as well, like I said, we're monitoring it. Our panelists, I see some answers, going through as well. So put it in the Q&A and we'll get to it. But, someone asked, I have a career gap due to raising children, right? So a working parent, and they want to get back to the workforce, right? So as a Latina, as a mother, as a parent of young children, how can I not be stigmatized or, punished by being paid less? Because I want to have a work-life balance. I want to have family. I want to be fulfilled both personally and professionally, and I want to focus on my career. So, how do I advocate for myself?
So I don't have any children, but I do. There are other women on my team who are mothers. Like there's 4 women and I'm the only one that doesn't have children. So I think it's definitely important to understand what the team dynamic is going to be, and you're clear and transparent with what you can offer and what is comfortable for you. I think, and by that, I mean, if you know from like 5 to 6 every day, you have to step away to make dinner for the family, that is your time to be with the family. Try to ensure you're speaking to whoever the hiring manager is, or if you're speaking to the team during the hiring process, ask them what does the day look like in this role? Like, is there flexibility? Can I step away 1 hour, 5 to 6, and maybe sign on earlier? It's always going to be a give and take. And many times there's going to be teams, not everyone has children, but for me particularly, I live with my parents who are senior citizens. I just moved back with them recently in August to kind of help. So for me, I almost feel like a caregiver to my parents, because I do have to help my mom. She's dealing with health issues. So for me, it might not be children. Every single person here has a circumstance in which they need to be with their family during a certain time. They need to step away. And in my industry, there is flexibility there, but you have to offer an alternative to make sure there's a balance so that other team members don't feel like you're not pulling your weight per se. Mm-hmm. And then another part of that is what I've seen. I know a few women who've taken maternity leaves or paternity leaves during the time in which I've worked with them. My honest approach, if I was in that situation, just based on the experience that I've seen and just talking to colleagues of mine who are women and parents, and Taina, of course, herself is one here, so I'm sure she has a lot to touch on. You definitely want to stay within the company you're at, because you're telling them this is the time that I want to take off. and they have a rapport with you. So even if you're like, I need to take a break, see if they can offer a break. Like, let's say you want to do an extension to what is already allowable with the state. Sometimes it's easier from what I've seen to stay. And I've seen women even just move on after they're back from maternity leave, because you've already worked with that team. You've already worked with your manager. They know what you can offer prior to anything. And they're going to be comfortable with like readjusting you back to the team when you're ready to come back. So with anything, any time off, I mean, I know there's a lot of people who take a mental break, a mental time off just for their own personal sanity. They need to take that to refocus. I mean, there's been so many circumstances beyond just motherhood during the COVID pandemic that just everyone has a personal circumstance that they're dealing with. So just try to be transparent, advocate for yourself, and see what you can offer in terms of flexibility to know, so that they know you're able to bring what you can to the role. And I know Julian is also a father, so I'm sure he had to take paternity leave. So he probably has more to say on this than I do, but that's from someone's perspective who is not yet a mother yet. So
I just wanted to share, I do know there are organizations that say you do stop working for a set amount of time. When you get back into the workforce and there is an organization that's kind of calculating your years of employment with that profession. I know how sometimes somebody can take a dip in their salary, because technically if you've been a nurse for 20 years, but you only work 10, they're only going to count the 10 years because you haven't been practicing as a clinician for that amount of time. So unfortunately, with something like that, it may be a bit more challenging, as opposed to someone who maybe during the pandemic took off from a job that they previously worked at and they're going back to that job. That's a smoother transition. But somebody who's been off for an extended amount of time, you haven't been working, you haven't potentially kept your skills up to par. So an organization will question that and then will try to compensate you accordingly. Julian, I don't know if you have any additional comments.
Yeah, just a few. Sort of COVID was mentioned. I think fortunately in the last few years, a lot of things have been destigmatized in the workplace. So I think folks generally have a lot more flexibility to work remotely, virtually, the time of day that you might work. So circumstances do play a factor, but fortunately, a lot of managers recognize that it's pretty important these days to at least bend a little bit to individual employees' needs. Excuse me. I think to sort of answer the question around career gap, I think that it could be a little challenging to sort of know exactly where you might fall, but ultimately you have a set of skills that are going to be valued if you're offered a job. I think, again, you're that number one option for that job, and you should go in feeling confident and strong, especially around salary negotiations. But maybe it's more important, in order to get back into your field or to get back into the workplace, to really think about what happens next year. Not this year, but next year. How do I set myself up now for a year from now so I can get that promotion, so I can get that salary increase? If maybe the starting figure is not exactly where you want, the type of compensation package is not exactly what you need, perhaps there's a little bit of a stepping stone in a process to really ease your way back into the workplace such that you are ultimately where you want to be. And maybe that just takes 6 months to a year to get there. But I think you need to plan for that now, and you need to have open and honest conversations with HR about what that looks like, that path to progression. I just made up that term, but I like it, that path to progression. And then I think you need to do a really good job of monitoring yourself and working with your manager or a sponsor in the organization, someone that's gonna, behind closed doors, root for you and lead conversations on sort of your promotion and your readiness for a salary increase, et cetera. I think you have to sort of navigate all those things, keep that really front of mind, and again, be super concrete in terms of what key performance indicators you've agreed to and whether or not you're actually hitting those.
Absolutely, path to progression. Love that. So we just have a couple of questions, audience questions that I want to get to. And I think these two, may go hand in hand. So we know that, the workforce has dramatically changed, right? And I think a lot of us are seeing it, a turnover and increasing responsibilities as well. So, how do you quantify your salary when the job requires for you to now take on more staff? And then, kind of the caveat to that, right, is you take on more responsibilities, maybe manage more staff, because you're the person that's there. but then they're telling you, well, there's some money for increases, at the moment. How do you navigate that? How do you have this conversation? When do you, walk away?
I was thinking about that first question for a little bit because I saw it sort of pop up, and maybe a quick way to quantify it, although it's kind of rough, is you can look at the organization. You can try to find two roles. It can be the role you're applying for or a different one, and say, okay, one role has these series of responsibilities without being a people manager. A very, very comparable role has a very similar set of responsibilities, but is a people manager, and sort of what's the delta in terms of range or numbers. And that's actually a sort of a crude way of quantifying that. That's like a very targeted approach to answering that question. I think, alternatively, again, it's about jumping onto sort of the Glassdoors and the Indeeds of the world and really surveying the landscape and doing this maybe more broadly as a general matter, really looking at examples of no people managing and people managing, and then trying to figure out, how does this organization actually value that skill set or that responsibility?
And just to add on to that, because I've been in a position where I've been given more work. I don't know if it was COVID. It wasn't COVID specific, but the approach that I've always taken is you definitely don't want to ask more money before you've had the opportunity to do the work, the extra work. So you want to be in it. Like, let's say they're like, we're going to give you this. And you're kind of realizing, after looking at the job descriptions for my role and the role above me, just keep it back in mind. Like, this is something that's more than what a role of what I'm currently in would take on. And then that's even more of a reason 6 months or even 4 months, 5 months from then to be like, I've been doing this. I've taken on these additional responsibilities for the last 5, 6 months, 4 months, and talk to your manager. I think it's easier to talk from a place of what you've done than from a place of what you're going to do.
Absolutely. I know we're almost at time, but I saw a question come to me that I think is very interesting, and I think we mentioned it early on, and it's about sponsorship. So how do you go about, finding and securing a sponsor, someone that, when you're not in the room, they're advocating on your behalf? How do you, any tips on navigating, again, not a mentorship, but, a sponsor?
Yeah, I appreciate that delineation too, because a mentor is very different than a sponsor. The latter, the sponsor, is that person that not only has sway in the organization, but again, behind closed doors, they're going to advocate for you and really push your name to the top of the resume, so to speak. I think the way I've gone about that, and I've had some success in certain places, not so much success in others. I think it's really about networking and building these relationships super organically. Sometimes organizations have sort of formal practices that allow for meet and greets, but I find these folks to be the built off of more organic situations, and that sometimes organically that can happen from cold emails. You find someone that's relevant to your job, maybe 10 years ahead of you. Send them an email. You may never have met them before, but send them an email, ask them interesting questions, set up a half an hour, come prepared to have a good conversation with them about their career trajectory, how they got to where they are, and how you can mimic that. And then stay in touch, or maybe even set up, quasi quarterly or semi-annual meetings. That way you always have an ongoing touch point with that person. You're top of mind when either interesting work develops that you can get tagged against, or they're sitting in their room making decisions about who's going to get that promotion, who's going to get that salary adjustment, etc. And so I think you want to try to identify those folks first, and then be very proactive about your outreach to them, and then also sort of generating goodwill. You can volunteer on special projects, things of that nature, which is always great.
Absolutely. Marissa, any thoughts on your end?
Yeah, so I think for me, because I feel like I want to speak from a personal experience, it took me a long time to get I call it advocate. And I know mentor can be someone who is kind of helping mentor you throughout your career path, but may not necessarily be at the company you're at, so can't help push forward your career promotions. So for me personally, it's actually funny because I found an advocate in someone who was just coming back from taking time off while she took time with her daughter. And she wasn't my direct manager. She was a manager on my team. And I started to work one-on-one with her on projects. And really, we developed an organic relationship where, you know, I helped her, she helped me, and she kind of saw something in me that she wanted to advocate for. And we had from the hours that we spent together, we had a lot of personal conversations, and she just saw, I guess she saw something special in me, and she knew that I was putting in the work, and she spoke on my behalf to make sure that I was getting promoted. The background that I come from, you know, I dealt with a delay in getting into my career, especially because I graduated in 2010. The market had just fallen apart in 2008. There weren't that many roles available. A lot of the roles that I was taking were temp to permanent. I had a skill set that was really could be translated across roles, but I was having a hard time just putting my foot in the door. I mean, Taina might remember, and it was a difficult time. And I think you just have to continue to work towards it, put in the effort. And I came across my mentor, who was my advocate at the company that I was at previously, who kind of spoke to where I was. And I was able to speak to her transparently about my salary. So I think it's daunting for some people who maybe are introverts and like are fearful of going out there and networking. Like, networking today looks so different than what it did back then because of COVID. Like, no one goes anywhere. So I think we have to be a little bit fluid in how we address networking, because it's so different now than what it was just even 2 years ago. Like, I was literally going to after work events, meeting so many people. Sometimes an advocate for you could be right next door, right in the team that you're in, a team that's connected to your team. And that's why Juliana and I have mentioned throughout this time, network within the company that you're at. Sometimes you're finding someone just 2 steps away that you didn't know was there. And sometimes easier to do that than go to a network event. I mean, that might not be for everyone. So honestly, there's a way to it, any which way that you want to approach it. Don't be closed-minded in the way that you can find someone. Even if it's like, oh, we have a mutual connection, just find ways. Because I know for some people, it's a little bit daunting to have to like reach out to someone who doesn't know them from a hole in the wall. So, and I think that was definitely important to where I am today, is just having that advocate that I met.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing. So, you know, some major takeaways, right? You know, come prepared to have those conversations, you know, be willing to have this conversation, ask those questions, and networking, right? It's crucial for your professional trajectory. You never know where a conversation, you know, might lead. And, you know, to your point, Marissa, networking looks different, right? You know, send a LinkedIn message, right? Or an email or DM, you know, whatever platform you're using. You never know where a conversation may lead. So.
Yeah, maybe.
Well, thank you.
Oh, wait, Julian has something.
Go ahead. Yeah,
this will be quick. What other thought, aside from being prepared?
No, I think this is so important and exciting to talk about.
One other thought beyond that maybe is the value of practice. And maybe this kind of fits into being prepared, but you know, if you're uncomfortable cold emailing someone, cold calling someone, or networking in general, I grab a buddy, grab a friend, and have a conversation and literally walk through the steps. Take 10 minutes. What are the questions that come to mind? You know, how could you reframe them to make them more impactful? And have someone that's going to play the role on the opposite side. That way you can get more comfortable, because I think it really takes a lot of practice to get comfortable and good at some of these things. Salary negotiations certainly is tough, and that happens so seldomly for so many of us that, you know, you'll be out of practice by the time you get a new job. So wherever possible, I say practice and practice often.
That's so funny, because my twin sister, she had to do a deck for a role. She like presented it to me, like as if I was.
There you go. You're the client. Yeah.
Yeah. So
yeah,
it is
absolutely.
helpful. Practice makes perfect.
I remember my first networking event when I was in grad school. I had a script that I developed, and I was on the mirror the night before practicing, asking questions, remembering to smile, you know, all of that. So it definitely helps. Well, We're at the top of the hour, so thank you so much, both, Marissa and Julian, for your insight. I know we gained some very valuable lessons from this. So on behalf of Knowledge Tri-State, we want to thank everyone for joining us. Just a quick plug in. If you want to hear more about what we have in store for the next year, follow us on all of our social media platforms. We're developing our programs, we're learning. Let us know how we're doing. Let us know what you want to see moving forward, what topics of interest are out there, but connect with us. We're talking about networking, connect with us on LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, send us an email. What do you want to see? So thank you so much, everyone, for being here. Really appreciate it. Hope everyone has a good night.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Great.
Appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you. Let's stay on for a quick photo op. Okay, everybody. Juli, you're not looking at the, you're not